Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming, particularly to those who've never been before. Welcome. I should just give you a little bit of health and safety before we start. If the fire alarm should go, it'll be unexpected, so we have to treat it seriously. If that happens, please head downstairs, not in the lift, down the stairs, and unless the flames are in front of you, go out through the door that you came in through. If the flames are in front of you, someone else will open the rear access and you will be shepherded towards the fun fair. Please don't be sidelined by the fun fair, but make your way from there to the Minster Green, which is where we're asked to assemble in terms of making sure that no one's left in the building. I don't think, if anybody feels that they can't get safely downstairs without using the lift, don't use it, but stay in this room. The fire brigade would rather rescue you through the windows than have you injured falling down the stairs. That is their message. And make sure, should you be taken short, either with or without a fire, the corridor, which is just outside the door here, leads to the loo. So that's where that is. And on with the talk which we're having this evening from Andrew Down. I must say this is a tribute to the idea that you should talk to your relatives whilst they still remember. Yes. Because there are so many things which people have said, oh, I wish I'd talked to my father, my grandfather, grandmother, or whatever about. And the O'Shea family is a shining example of those who did actually talk and have excellent intergenerational communication. And I know it's going to be an excellent talk because I've seen parts of it before. So without further ado, this is Andrew Down. He is our speaker this evening. Thank you very much for coming, Andrew.
So it works better with the front or with the middle light on. Yeah, this I can't read otherwise. So good evening, thank you all for coming. As said, I'm Andrew, Bill's grandson. You might notice a bit of a family resemblance. Apparently we've even got the same hair parting. So Bill came from London in 1940 as a sham evacuee. And tonight's presentation is based on his life in his own words, with images and sound clips to help bring it to life, so please don't laugh. Quick show of hands, who have family members that work in shams? You all of them, good. Anybody remember Bill O'Shea? Yeah, quite a few, excellent. So, before we start, this is a piece of wood, which I'm sure you all know about. Think about this. This, or something very similar to it, has a very significant part of the story. See if you can find it, we'll come back to it later. Bill O'Shea was born in 1921, just over 104 years ago, in Trafalgar Square, London. Not the one you're probably thinking of. This was number 15 in the back street in Peckham, which Trafalgar Square is there, and number 15 was on the end. He was the first of 4 children to William and May O'Shea, having moved there from Bermondsey just after their marriage. Sadly, brother Dennis died from whooping cough, aged just 18 months. So Bill lived a fairly straightforward and uneventful childhood, apart from losing part of a finger in a magnet accident which involved a hospital crown trip to the hospital. He tried music at school, although he never progressed further than screeching out the first few notes of the Bluebells of Scotland on the violin at lessons 1 6 a week including installments on the instrument. When Dad sat out of the evening meal one day, I said I was going out to play football. Not while I'm paying good money for lessons, you stay in the practice, was his reply. After 10 minutes, the man who had endured and survived the trenches of the First World War had no intention of going through worse, and said, "Stop that, leave around and get on." Those words were so hurtful, I've not touched the musical instrument since. However, at the age of 12, his artistic skills almost won him a scholarship at the prestigious Peckham School of Arts and Crafts, which is now University of the Arts, London. Narrowly missing out on the place to fellow pupil Dennis Hammond. Whether this was purely down to better family connections and his brother winning the scholarship the previous year or not, we will never know. Bill's dream of becoming a commercial artist, designing cinema, opposed to starting that day. Many years passed until he picked up the brush again. Some of his artwork from later years remains within the family, and we bought a few lying up at the back if you want to have a look later. But leaving school at 14, his first job was a toolroom apprentice at the factory his father worked at. Get a good trade behind you, you'll always be employed, was his advice. In 1935, the family had moved just off the Old Kent Road, and in June 1939, after several years working for other engineering firms in South East London, Bill joined J.M. Shand Limited at Lee Green, Lewisham. He had been interviewed by Don Stotts, a Yorkshireman, who quizzed him on what he had done, what he could do, what he couldn't. Mr. Stotts was clearly a practical engineer, no point trying to bull him. He seemed satisfied and said that Bill could start on Monday, on a week's trial at £1 an hour. Shand's factory at the time was off St Peter's Courtyard at Lee Green. The building, which you can see there, had started life as a horse-drawn fire engine station. It was a small factory, the ground floor had been stables, and now housed milling machines, shapers and circus grinders. Upstairs were the lathes and tool makers. There were 4 lathes in the line. On the first was the working charge hand, Harry English, who was in charge of the lathes and handed out the work given to him by Mr. Stotts. Harry proved to be a fussy but fair charge hand. Once he had inspected, measured and accepted your work, he would stand his ground on your behalf against any toolmaker or even Stotts and manager. If Harry said your work was right, that was the end of it. Sunday, 3rd of September 1939 started as a typical day. Dad and I were down East Lane Sunday Market on Allwood Road, where we heard Prime Minister Chamberlain's announcement coming to the radio spare parts store.
I am speaking to you from the cabinet room in Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government the final bill, stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
When I heard those words in their original setting, my blood ran cold. Almost at once, the air inside sounded a warning. We hurried back to the Old Kent Road and hopped on a tram home. Mum was sure to be worried. No sooner had we got home, the all clear sounded. A false alarm, just making sure the siren worked. I don't know. Britain was now at war. No one's life had been their own until the war ended. Everything was done according to government directives. Call-up papers fluttered through letterboxes. No imports of luxury goods, rationing of basic goods, everything was dedicated to the war effort. Toolroom work and skills became a reserved occupation, so I knew I wouldn't be called up. If anyone doubts the wisdom of this decision, just think for a moment about the mind-boggling amount of ordnance that armed forces require. The Spitfire had 8 machine guns, each with a belt of 300 bullets, so 2,400 bullets per plane. But 100 fighters in the air at one time, and they required almost 250,000 bullets every time they went up. Every plane, tank and gun requires thousands of accurate parts to be mass-produced, which in turn require press tools, fixtures and measuring gauges to be made. We were buried in government contracts, and if the firm didn't have a machine with the right capacity, one was provided. Nothing was allowed to hinder production. In December 1939, management took a coach load of us to dinner at Monaco's, a society restaurant on Shaftesbury Avenue. The regular clientele was sat at separate tables, dressed in dinner jackets or officers' uniforms, and the women, in long evening dresses, danced with the orchestra. We sat awkwardly at a single long table out of the way at the end of the restaurant and had briefly entered the world seemingly untouched by war. We were all overwhelmed and uncomfortable amidst this unfamiliar luxury and finery, made worse by the menu all being in French. I ended up with lamb cutlets, more decorative than filling, and ordered a bottle of light ale from the wine waiter. Roy Shand embarrassed us further by tapping his glass for attention and then standing up to make a speech about work and patriotism while the orchestra played on. We could hardly hear a word, perhaps just as well. Early in the morning, New Year's Day 1940, Dad knocked on the bedroom door and said, "Time for work, Bill." I called him into the room and said, "I won't be going to work today, I can't move." My legs and ankles were really swollen, and I could only raise my left arm by lifting it with my right one. Both legs then went into spasm, which sent bolts of pain right up through my body and into my head. The doctor was called for, and when he arrived, he diagnosed a rheumatic fever, which needed a long hospital stay. I was taken to the Portland Hospital in Epsom, a converted asylum commandeered by the Army for expected war casualties, but at present used as a civilian overflow hospital. The wards were big, a row of beds down each long wall, and a double row of beds in the centre, about 40 in all. Dad came and visited me most weekends and helped break up the board with a full bed rest and staring at the ceiling. One week he brought down my old music stand, which he modified to the head, clipped to the head of the bed, so I could at least breathe without minor discomfort. One time, just to break the monotony, I broke out in an all-over rash, and to ensure it wasn't contagious, I was placed in a windowless isolation room at the end of the ward. After pokes, prods and tests, they decided it was just a vitamin deficiency and prescribed a jug full of orange juice, which was refilled every time I drank it. Where they got the oranges from, I have no idea, as they had been in short supply since the outbreak of war. The juice and a daily dose of aspirin was the only medication I received. Eventually, I was allowed to sit up for meals, washing and reading, but for short periods only. Then the magic day arrived. You can sit by the fire and listen to the wireless tonight. After tea that day, I swung my legs out of bed and touched the floor for the first time in nearly 3 months, everything tingling with pins and needles. In a borrowed dressing gown, big enough to go round me 3 times, I shuffled slowly down towards the fire and took the last of 6 armchairs. Boy, it felt good to feel the heat of that fire and listen to Tommy Hanley in that. It was the first thing I could laugh at for weeks. A cup of cocoa about 8 o'clock went out very much, thank you. At 9, I made my way back to bed, and believe it or not, old Jellybeck was glad to get there. As the days passed, I went walk out down the corridors, eating from the cafeteria, where I could buy a limited selection of sweets, newspapers, tea, and sponge fairy cake. Any excuse to get out and about, even ran errands for those bedbags. After about 3 months, on a Friday in early April, they decided I was well enough to go home, and I was discharged with a warning. No violent exercise, no running upstairs to a time, things like that, because I now have a weak heart. Get away, you can't tell a 19-year-old anything. I felt great. There was no hospital transport back then, so So I was given a travel warrant for a ticket and pointed in the direction of the station for all the way home. No home phone either, so no way to let anyone know I was coming. I noticed lots of changes in that short time on the walk from Queen's Road Station to home. Railings gone, melted down to the war effort, barrage balloons in the park that deterred dive bombers. Mum answered my knock at the front door, stood pop-eyed and open mouthed. Ooh, it's Will happening. Ooh was a favourite one-word expression when confronted by the unexpected. Good or bad, only the inflection and the voice changed me. Inside the house, it seems small and cramped after the big walls, so I've become used to. However, in the words of the song, be ever so humble, there's no place like it. When I got home, I found an Anderson shelter in the garden. And brother George and Mum dug a hole. Dad had laid some duckboards in the bottom to keep the damp at bay, and had bolted the corrugated shelter around it and fixed the flat ends. Most people just hung a bit of sacking over the oven to keep the worst weather out, whereas ours had a small porch with a proper hinged wooden door, which Dad had made by some timber that he had acquired, that I could keep my bike in. Knowing 5 people was not like that there, a single mattress was laid for Mum and my sister to lie on, and in each corner was a car seat. Me and Dad were the backs of the door, and George and Father were there. We could sit fully clothed, arms folded for warmth, in cushioned comfort, with a blanket over outstretched legs, resting our heads against the side of the shelter. Ventilation had been improved by adding a small chimney and wire doors cowling. The soil that had been dug out was in sandbags packed along the top and sides, with marrows and listils growing. The next day, I went back to Shan's to see if my job was still there. Mr. Stocks assured me it was, so I could start back on Monday. After a week back with overtime, it felt like I'd never been away. During July and August, there had been many air raids on the Kent fighter airplanes and radar stations, but none had reached London. Partly because the RAF had pitched into them, and partly because Germany hadn't yet thrown the full weight of the Luftwaffe at London, although they outnumbered us by 4 to 1. Saturday, 7th September 1940, dawned bright, clear and sunny. Because of decisions made hundreds of miles away, England and the people in it would never be the same again. Blissfully unaware of this, like everyone else planning to carry on with their life that day, the only decision I made that morning was to cycle to work instead of getting the bus. With sandwiches and a flask of beer in my haversack, off I went. It's about 4 miles to the evening. I puffed a bit going up the lonely trail, but arrived in time for an 8 o'clock start. The morning passed uneventfully, and when the dinner bell sounded, I sat on the stall on the tube, a tin of sandwiches and a bit of paper. At about 2 o'clock that afternoon, we heard the sirens sound the alert. Only this time, they were accompanied by the blood-chilling sound of distant explosions, and nearby, the sharp bark of anti-aircraft fire. We all switched off our machines and looked at one another, open-mouthed at this new experience, unsure what to do. Someone said, "Sod this, I'm off." We didn't need telling twice. What we didn't realise at the time was this was the start of the blitz. Grabbing coat and haversack, I was down in the courtyard and on my bike in a flash. I cycled down Lee High Road to Lewisham. Nobody about, empty buses and trams abound where they were. Where the drivers and passengers had found shelter, I don't know. With no traffic to contend with, I was soon in Lewisham High Street. I heard a crackling sound and realised I was riding through broken glass like crushed ice. Until then, I hadn't seen any structural damage. My biggest danger was falling anti-aircraft shrapnel. Even the smallest piece made a loud whistling sound and took a chunk out wherever it landed. I glanced up in Lewisham High Street and saw my first wave of hungry bombers glinting in the sun, like a shoal of fish in the blue sea. 20 flying high because of the forest of barrage balloons in a tight diamond formation. Amongst them were the black puffballs of anti-aircraft shells exploding. Although the fire was accurate, they didn't seem to be hitting any bombers, which were heading towards me and passing to my left, and would soon be behind me. I found out later that they had flown up the Thames, blanket bombed docks and railway yards, and were now wheeling around and emptying their bomb bays to light up the planes for the return flight home, their fuel only allowing on behalf of the target. I decided it might be safer to get off the main road and cut through the side streets of Deptford, but I soon found the second wave of planes coming straight toward me. I flung my bike aside and lay down against the bridge arch on the narrow pavement. A heavy mountain car came up out of the middle of the road, spun in the air a few feet like a flip coin, and clattered down on the road. The bomb must have hit a main drain or sewer somewhere, and the blast forced it out like a cork from a pop gun. I pressed on and hadn't gone very far where I saw another group of planes. Ahead of me was a brick-built public shelter. Thinking I was lucky to find somewhere safe, it was surprisingly empty when I got inside. Although the German onslaught was ruthless, so was the shelter. I looked up and saw clouds they hadn't finished building yet. But where the road forks at New Cross Road and London Bell stands a marked bit of ground up. The road drops away steeply downhill, and on a normal day, you can see the cranes unloading cargo ships at Millwall and East India docks. I was puzzled why I hadn't seen or heard any ambulances or fire engines. But when I got nearer to the East End, it looked as though every ambulance and fire engine in London was trying to cope with the inferno there. When I turned off the Old Kent Road into our street, my heart almost stopped, because there was an ambulance and a small crowd outside the house, and 3 stretchers covered in white sheets on the pavement, 2 of them with bodies on. To my relief, I saw Danny in the crowd, and he told me it was a family officer whose shell had been hit by a bomb. After a weekend of bombing, not much sleep, I surfaced on Monday morning and caught a train towards work. The buses and trams were running again, but the service was intermittent and arrived a few minutes late. We learned that a young draftsman from the Drawn office had been killed by a bomb in Sidcup, and nearly everyone at work had tales of hardship and horror. This went on for days. The next Wednesday, I left work after spending much of the day in the firm's brick and concrete shelter in the courtyard. After dinner, we listened to the wireless. I had a spring wash, got dressed in my working clothes and boots ready for morning, and we flashed into the shelter that night. We tried to settle down, but there was gunfire very near. Then I heard the double drone of planes and the whistle of bombs. Bloody hell, that was close, followed by 3 more. And then a 5th one exploded. The ground moved like water. It was big, like being a small rowing back in the wing of a big ship. Dad and I both turned towards the door and were blasted in the face by a stream of grit, dust and dirt from the edges of the door. I dread to think what damage the concussion of that explosion would have done inside our shelter but for the door. If the bomb had left the plane a split second earlier, it may have hit our shelter. When we looked outside, the oak posts and tin roof of the shed had fallen onto the shelter and were supporting tons of bricks and rubble. The beams made a triangular tunnel through which we could crawl into the garden. Against the moon and starlit sky, the black silhouette of our row of houses had a deep V in it. The bottom of the V was where our house should be. We could see straight through to the houses across the road. The sides of the V were the 2 adjoining houses, so one bomb had made 3 families homeless. I glanced at my watch. It was 5 to 11 on the 11th of September. Dad shouted to the Lawrences on one side to ask if they were okay. They hadn't been hurt, but could smell gas. Then to the Dellums on the other side. They were fine, but had water leaking into their shelter. The sound of another plane gunfire, with searchlights raised in the sky defiant, sent us crawling back into the shelter, through the lean-to tunnel. No one ever mentions the smell of an explosion. It's a dry, bitter, burnt sort of smell that stings at the nostrils and hangs in the air for ages. Dad said to Mum, May, the house is gone, and she sobbed heart-rending sobs. Over 20 years of building a home, gone in an instant. Now in their 40s, faced with the prospect of starting all over again with nothing. Dad broke open the whiskey and we all had a top. If steadying the nerves wasn't medicinal, I don't know what is. We were all traumatised, to say the least. We tried to settle down, but before long we heard voices, the sound of pickaxes and crowbars. This was the volunteer rescue squad. They all had daytime jobs that worked for night and air raids with only a tin hat of protection. The next morning, we went to my dad's sister's house just around the corner. When Dad went to the town hall to see about finding some accommodation, I walked with him a few hundred yards to Old Kent Road and saw the reason for the previous night's loud gunfire. Parked across both sets of tram lines were three 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns with a long barrel still pointing skywards. Exhausted gun crews sat on the stabilisers, having a cup of tea and a bun for a mobile nappy partly alive. They were knee-deep in the ejected brass shell cases, hundreds all over the road. Those three guns had been firing on and off for about 8 hours. There would be no trams running for the next hour or so until the debris was cleared away. We were given authorisation for temporary shelter at a local school and a grant of £30 to reclothe the 5 of us. When we got to the school, we spoke to the canteen lady, who gave us a plate each, on which were 2 slices of corned beef, 2 lumps of dry bread, and a cup of stewed tea. Not much point in complaining, as that would go back. The alarm sounded again that night, so down to the shelter we went. Women and children were allowed to lie down on straw mattresses while the men stood in the entrance. There was 1 chair on which we could sit 20 minutes at a time. The next day was Friday. I said I would go back to work on Monday. I planned to sleep with Shans during the week and stay with my Aunt Laura at weekends. My mum and sister got out of London to Dunstable. Dad had his hands full sorting them himself out, so my brother George came with me for the time being. When we got to my aunt's house, we realised they had no air shelter for the simple reason they had no garden or bathroom. Still, they made us very welcome. On Monday, I set off to Shan with a few things in a case, collected my wages and explained the situation to Mr. Stotts, asking if it would be okay if I said it stayed in the firm shelter that night. I wasn't the only one. Johnny Trigg lost his home, staying there too. He had the keys to open the factory in the morning. I went and bought some clothes, and the stand jar was very kindly off to get his wife to help out with the laundry. Another problem taken care of. That must have been the week the look office switched to heavier daytime raids, because at 10 o'clock that morning we were down in the shelter again. The gossip was that Roy Shan was out scouring the country for a new factory space, because we couldn't go on with this was part of the introduction at all. The all clear sounded at 5 o'clock and everyone went home. Me and Johnny Trigg went over to the cafe, had some cold cuts of meat, Sutherland squeak, a big mug of tea and a baked jam roll, nice bit of stodge to fill the stomach. I remember to get my flask filled for later that night. When we got back to the shelter, we found 2 deck chairs, 4 cushions and 2 travel mugs in there, left for us by Len Atkinson. On Thursday, Les Sorrell asked if he fancied a bath. Fancy it, we certainly needed it. We went home with him that evening and took turns to the bathroom after she filling shilling coins into the meter, the Ascot gas heater. On the 19th of September, Roy Shan announced that he had found factory floor space at Axminster in the carpet factory. Our own factory would be dismantled and transported to Devon, where he arranged accommodation for married workers and lodgings for singles. All this suited me fine, and now had somewhere to stay with greater safety. On the morning of Wednesday 25th of September, we left St Peter's Court by coach about 9 o'clock. There were no motorways in 1940, just trunk roads, and we roughly followed the route of what is now the modern A30 for a 150-mile journey. Our first stop was Stockbridge, a market town in Hampshire. Most of us were seeing vast green rolling hills, open countryside, and picturesque new towns for the first time. We arrived at Axminster about 4 in the afternoon. Those of the lodgings there got off, the rest of us carried on to Seaton, 6 miles away on the coast. 5 of us were billeted at Gloucester House near the top of Castle Hill. Me, Bob Holmes, Les Phillips and Tubby Mann were all in single beds on one large room at the top of the house. Tom Howard was on the lower floor with a room to himself. It didn't take him long to find the local pub, and he'd wake up the landlady to unlock the front door, which she closed every night at 10 o'clock. It cost 35 shillings a week for bed and breakfast and an evening meal. Laundry and baths cost extra, and we had to book the bathroom in advance and pay 2 shillings for the gas we were heating. The next day, we found a carpet factory on the edge of town and got our machinery in position, where it was bolted to the concrete floor and wired up. Some machines were up and running for a few hours. The days that followed were hectic, with new machines arriving from America on the Lend-Lease programme. Whatever England wanted was provided, we paid for after the war. There was always great excitement when a new delivery arrived. As well as the machine, there'd be cartons of cigarettes, boxed fruit cake, newspapers, and letters from the packers wishing as well. The wood from those crates lasted a half-a months. From now on, each machine was expected to run 24 hours a day and have 2 operators, each working a 12-hour shift. New workers recruited, and the man I was partnered with was a loud-mouthed, belligerent, hot-tempered so-and-so. So I let him do the 8 AM to 8 PM shift permanently, so he could be with his family, while I did the night shift, meaning I only had to see him 10 minutes a day to change. I soon heard we were taking on new staff, so I had a word with the new manager, Wally West, and asked him if he had a place for a toolmaker's apprentice, since my brother George was a school leaving age. He told me to get him down to Axminster for a month's trial, and the letter had him on the train to Waterloo in no time. I met him at the station and got him into our lodgings. He told me Dad had moved to Luton and had a job at Vauxhall Motor Company making alloys, so we were now miles apart, but all fixed up and safe. On our first Saturday night, the boys said there was a dance at the Guildhall and asked if I was going. What, dressed like this? They fixed me up. Slacks from Bob Holmes, shoes from Les Phillips, and a white cricket pullover with a coloured V-neck from Tubby Mann. A free dance point or two, and we were off to sample Axminster's finest nightlife with a trio of piano, drums, and accordion. Although our dancing probably looked more like we were being attacked by a swarm of wasps. Dancing lessons were to come later with Ruth Heels. She lived in a parent's bungalow next to the timber yard that her father owned. At the side of the bungalow was a long wooden shed, where Ruth gave dancing lessons for 2 shillings an hour. On the walls of the shed were the certificates and awards, proving she knew more about dancing than we did. After collecting our fees and sprinkling French chalk on the floor from a perforated can, we have a lesson on the quick step, foxtrot waltz. Someone would wind up the gramophone, lower the sound box and needle, and onto a worn and scratchy 78. The tango was a hoot. Ruth would hit some partnerless pupil and push, glide and steer the resisting tonnage of this clod-hopping over backwards down the hall, trying to look as grateful and exotic as reasonably possible. If the tempo slowed, a quick stop to re-crank the gramophone was called for. However, there is never much call for a tango at a Saturday night hop, and the few art show-offs that tried it soon had the floor to themselves. When our landlady asked if we required any poultry to take home for Christmas, George and I realised we hadn't enough time to save both Christmas presents and our fare home. So we pulled resources and ordered 2 chickens, thinking there would be a wartime shortage. One for Aunt Nora and one for Aunt. There was just enough cash left over for 1 train fare, so we tossed a coin. George won, like he would. I spent a very unfestive Christmas and Boxing Day alone in Axminster. Early in 1941, the Axminster division of the Devonshire Regiment of Local Defence Volunteers, later renamed the Home Guard, was formed. Most of us joined, meeting in the drill hall Friday nights and Sundays. We were given time off from the long shift, starting at 10 instead of 8. We were issued a cap, uniform, Lee Enfield 303 rifle with bayonet, a canvas band lid containing 60 rounds, a gas mask, gas kit, army boots and leather gaiters. We were allowed to take them home with dire consequences if we lost anything. Officers were self-appointed from local estate agents, auctioneers, businessmen, because of their supposedly superior knowledge of handling men and materials. Inferiors, such as us, were allowed to reach the rank of corporal or sergeant. In reality, none of the officer elite had military experience and knew nothing about anything remotely useful should the enemy invade. They had never been trained in guerrilla tactics or general military warfare, therefore couldn't train us. Older volunteers who had served in the First World War were made sergeants, and they taught us square bashing, how to form fours, march and counter-march. Our responses to shouting commands were no doubt impressive for the casual observer, but wouldn't be much use against an enemy invasion. The nearest I can remember to tactics was one Sunday we marched up Ravens Hill, formed a long line across the top and were told to number off. On command, the odd numbers were to run downhill free-laden with fixed bayonets for 20 yards, lay down, firing at an imaginary enemy in the hedge's bottom. The even numbers then ran down 20 yards in front of us, lay down 5. The odds then got up and advanced, repeat. These waves of attacks had continued to the bottom of the slope, where we turned around and did the same thing again. We were told by a panting old Sergeant Diamond that the enemy doesn't like hold still. What a surprise. I wasn't too fond of it myself. A useful tactic, no doubt, when fighting Zulus. Not that there were many of these Devon, but we weren't. And our enemy would have machine guns ready in our advance. On other occasions, we went out to the rifle range of Dartford, where there were proper shooting butts and learned to fire our 303 rifles. The powerful recoil of the rifles came as a shock to those of its own use to fairground boycotts. Targets were raised at 100 yards and then 200. A long cane with a red disc on the end pointed to where the shot landed on the target. And if the stick was waved from side to side, we missed. We weren't too bad, and I don't remember any livestock suddenly dropping down the Once a fortnight, we were sent to our point from Valentine. We were bussed out to the steep embankment at the Homet end, and in the woods at the top of the embankment, 2 bell tents for sleeping. The sergeant allocated times of duty, 2 hours on guard, 4 hours off. I always seemed to cop the 2 till 4 shift, and never the best one, which was 10 till midnight. The ones on that shift had the rest of the night to sleep. Poor old sergeant was up and down the embankment all night changing the guard. 2 of us would stand, one each side of the entrance, and up on the parapet on top of the tunnel was a brand new machine gun with a crew of 3. Heavy trains would chug out from Exeter throughout the night, belching black smoke and hissing steam. After the train had passed, smoke drifted upon those in the parapet who coughed about 20 minutes. If we heard or saw anything suspicious, we were to thrust the rifle and bayonet forward in a menacing fashion, shout, "Halt! Who goes there? Friend or foe?" and get a bullet in the head as an answer. One evening, we heard a noise in the tunnel and gave the challenge, hoping for a response in English, dreading a response in German. We were unprepared for what came back. A cow found a gap in the fence and wandered up the line. It's a good job that Hitler hadn't planned to invade East Devon that night, as we spent most of it trying to encourage the cow back into the field. Another time we had an all-day Sunday exercise when we were to defend Membury against another Home Guard who were attacking and trying to capture our headquarters, the post office. Opposite was an orchard. Sarge took a lad from the nearby shed and sent Brother George up the tree to have a look out and sniper. Army Red Caps acted as judges, nominating those who they considered to be wounded or dead. Bob Holmes was busting for a pig when he was deemed to be wounded. Two burly Red Cross ladies put him on a stretcher and bounced him in a crouching run to the Red Cross where his imaginary wounds are bandaged. The dear ladies mopped his sweating brow and bought him a cup of tea, but had failed to diagnose bursting lung. Bob rapidly discharged himself and made for the nearest hedge. A relieved, calmer Bob returned to the hospital and finished his cup of tea. When we assembled for the bus home, Sergeant Darwin noticed that someone was missing. We soon realised it was George, who was still in the tree we put about 4 hours ago. The lad was fetched, and it took a few of us to help us stick Count George down onto the bus. Somehow, we were judged for a successfully defended memory, but to this day I still don't know how. We were not so fortunate the next weekend against the Marine Commandos. They were travelling in an armoured convoy of logs from Salisbury to Plymouth, and the Home Guard divisions along the route had to delay and harass them by inflicting casualties with Army Red Caps again acting as judges. I was in a ditch on the road to Hont, near Bow Bridge over the River Axe. We were lying in wait to ambush should they get around Axminster, but a scouting group of Marines at devious points waded up the river, rifles over the head, under the bridge and ambushed us from behind. That's not fair. The Red Cap said, you, there. I was one of them. So off with the tin hat, rifle upside down, we strolled back to the George Hotel, command post. We were given a doorstop sandwich containing something that they could pass to meat, and allowed to fill our tin mugs from a billy can of tea that had been stewing for hours over the wood fire in the courtyard. That night, we slept in the skillet. Early on Sunday morning, the rest of the convoy was sighted heading towards Axminster. The Home Guard were already in position to defend the George. Our bazooka scored a direct hit with a flour bag on the leading Brent gun carrier, which slew across the road and blocked it. A Marine officer jumped out and went along the convoy shouting clear military order. Deep us and get this bloody lot out. They did. Me and a few others were not allowed to take part because we were still dead yesterday. The Marines stormed in, throwing thunder flashes and using vegetable stumps in clubs and firing blanks from Tommy guns. They kicked over our own machine gun and its barricade of sand with buckets and scuffles. They clouded the gun within Collins, knocked his tin hat and glasses off, and accidentally trod. In less than 10 minutes, they were on their way to Honiton, and we were judged to have been wiped out. All except Jack Menace and John Corbett, who had been sent to defend the cellar. They surfaced mid-afternoon, red-faced and merry, came to the empty bottoms they'd run and settled with a lounge. The Marines' exercise was called off at Exeter because Plymouth was badly bombed that night. For all our enthusiasm and desire to do the right thing, our Home Guard duties were as farcical as Dad's army, and it's a great relief we could never put the ultimate test. Later, an American hospital with 600 beds was set up on the outskirts of Axminster at Millway with the expected war casualties. A railway siding was built off the railway line just before Axminster, so the wounded could be sent by ambulance straight to the hospital without coming through the town. Lorry loads of American soldiers, the muzzles of their rifles covered by condoms, caused blushes and giggles from passing groups of young ladies. Whether this was to prevent rain and dust from entering the barrels, or to advertise the fact they were ready for a different kind of action, I'll leave you to guess. Saturday night dances were never the same again. The local girls were enthralled by Midwestern and Southern rules, the endless supply of seed nylon stockings, the magic of learning to join and jiggle with Hank Leroy away was all that mattered. For them, all Americans looked and sounded like film stars. At work, Shands had enlarged the stamp production department, making metal marking stamps required to put serial numbers on various war components. The labour force for this was recruited from local women, who had the patience and dexterity to handle small pieces of type, enabling them to earn a far greater wage than was available locally. only been at the receiving end of a few choice miles from one, Myrtle Gold, when passing from the town factory. On Valentine's Day 1943, there was a ticket-only dance at the Guildhall. I heard Myrtle before, so I didn't say. It was me making a lame excuse to start the shift at 10 instead of 8. I entered the Guildhall, band was playing, but the floor was empty. On the opposite side, sitting alone was Myrtle, looking gorgeous, in a long blue taffeta dress with a crossover lace collar. I reckon the odds were 2 to 1 against it would all be, I'm waiting for a friend who will clear off. I crossed the hall and asked. We danced, and in a sense that dance has lasted to this day. Myrtle was on a 10 o'clock curfew from her mother. Besides, she had to start work at 6 the next morning. With every intention of sweeping her off her feet, I bought a bag of chips to share on the way home. She was obviously impressed, because we arranged to meet again the very next day, and apart from medical emergencies, it never been a day apart since. From 1943 onwards, the war was gradually turning into the Allies' favour, and the threat of an invasion of England had all disappeared. On Myrtle's 21st birthday in 1943, we became engaged. For the engagement party, I saw the Army CEO to hire the Guildhall dance hall. He insisted I pay a few pounds for a 6-hour insurance policy for up to £10,000 for fire and damage. I argued it wasn't that kind of party. He insisted, no insurance, no party. Guess who won? I went to Graham New's radio shop and hired him his radio ground to supply the music. Because beer was in short supply during the war, I had a word with Bill Stewart, the landlord of the Axminster Inn, who had known Myrtle all her life. The family house at the time was number 5 Church Street, which backs onto the Axminster Inn. He supplied a barrel of beer and crates there on sale return. A local team did a cold buffet, family and friends attended, about 30 in all. I had changed lodgings a few times. One was Mrs. Pascoe's, who had a lodging house up Line Street. I would come off shift at 8 a.m, have breakfast, supper in my case, and go straight to bed. My bedroom was right on the main road, and every morning about 9 o'clock, a mechanised convoy would go through Axminster, including tanks. They were steered through the narrow street by revving first one track and then the other. The curves and pavements were well chewed up by. Sleep being impossible on fine days, I would find a nearby field to lie down in the grass and sleep. If I didn't oversleep, I'd go back to Mr. Pascoe's for breakfast at about 5 o'clock, wash and get ready for my start of shift. When Myrtle and I got married on Saturday, 25th of August 1945, it was just after the BTO day when Japan surrendered, in effect bringing the war to an end. I'm sure this made ours the first peacetime wedding in Axminster. I don't know why, but when a woman looks her finest on a wedding day, she positively glows, whereas the groom, apart from the silly grin on his face, looks the same. The thing I remember is standing at the altar with George's best man and hearing the rustle of a wedding gown and the footsteps of my future wife and life coming to close at the stand by my side. Friends and relatives were as generous with presents as wartime shortages would allow. A factory collection totaled £25, and a group of close friends went even further and bought some new utility wires, which cost £12 and 10 shillings. Fred Morrell scrounged, begged and borrowed butter, margarine and dried fruit rations, and made a superb iced wedding cake in his kitchen range. After the reception, George Nichols, who ran a single-car taxi business in Axminster, gave us, despite the petrol shortage, a ride to our honeymoon in Weymouth. But during the mid-1940s, Sharon built and moved into a dedicated factory on a site between West Street and the railway line, with a radius incorporating the company logo. The company went into receivership in 1987, and in 1998, the Tesco superstore in Shannon Park Housing Estate was built on the site. Bill and Myrtle moved to the then new Fox Hill estate in 1957 into number 66, where they stayed for the rest of their married life. The marriage saw two children, Carol and Catherine. Carol married Murphy from Southchard, and Catherine married Mike, who came from Peckham and attended the same school Bill's family had temporary accommodation in after the house was bought. I now live just a few miles from Stockbridge, the first stop on the journey to Axminster. Small world. But outside of Shans, Myrtle was very active in St John's Ambulance. Children from the estate were always being sent up to see Mrs O'Shea to patch up minor injuries. She was also part of the women's football team, Axminster versus Seaton, Carnival 1950. Bill had a keen interest in photography and helped run Axminster Photography Club for many years, holding regular exhibitions in the church with his brother, Lord Stan Turner, who some of you may remember from the Blue Star Garage. Bill and Myrtle both continued to work at Shans until they retired. There's a photo album on one of the tables at the back from both of their retirements, so have a look there, you might see something you recognise. Bill passed in 2006, Myrtle in 2007. Now, who remembers this? Anyone got any idea why this is important? You're that's cheating, you know. My guess is?
Oh, is it something to do with the air raid shelter?
Yes, it is. Spot on. So you remember when the house was bombed, there was a mention of the small porch at Bill's Harfield. If it hadn't been for that porch and some bits of wood like this, which took the main impact from the blast, there's every chance that Bill and the family might have been killed. None of what you've heard would have happened. Mum wouldn't be sat over there, and I wouldn't be standing here sharing it with you. Here ended the lesson. Any questions? And I said we've got some bits on the cables at the back, some grandad's artwork, some Shans related stuff that you're welcome to go and have a look at. Right, you have a question?
How many people work in Shans at its peak?
Ooh, now there's a question. Any idea? We reckon a couple. There's consensus is a couple hundred. I mean,
I thought it was
Yeah.
more than that.
Quite possibly more.
More like about 400.
quite possibly.
Yeah, true.
But we're here all day, sure.
Yeah, I would say nearer 400.
Anyone? John?
I'm interested in the stamps and metals, but not set of those home. They're still making them in the 80s.
Yeah, I've seen a few sets from Shans for sale on eBay, but they're quite expensive, so I haven't managed to persuade myself yet. But yeah, there's still quite a few sets of Shans related stuff out there.
When the Bill and the other workers came down and started working in Shans during the wartime, what were they actually manufacturing at that time?
Well, it was basically machine parts. I said about the ladies in with the nimble little fingers doing the serial number standard. Did everything having the serial number on it? That was very good. But I mean, they were making bits for planes, bits for tanks, gun parts. Basically, whatever the government wanted them to do. Shans and lots of similar factories around the country, which is building everything for the war, nothing else mattered. So the government decided they needed 10,000 or something, put it out to tender, someone would get the contract and they'd make their stuff and then it would go off to be assembled somewhere else.
Was Bill a diary person? Because it also flows, did he sit down on two of the occasions and have long recollections of what
He actually wrote out his first 40 years. some years ago, and we do have a copy of it on the table in the back. That's got all sorts of little bits in it. What tonight's presentation, I've taken bits from that and put it together into a story. There's a lot of bits there that are interesting but not necessarily relevant to the overall story. I've tried to make it based on the wartime theme and Shan's and Axminster, because that's the special part. You know, hundreds of people have wartime stories that are all the same. You know, they've all been to the trenches, they've all been shot at, etc., etc. But most of what you heard tonight hasn't been shared outside of the family group. So that was the attempt. So he wrote his original words, and you know, I just collated it together into a flowing story that tells the story of the Shan's about. Yeah. Well, like I said, we've got some stuff at the back. If you want to have a look at, we'll be here for a while. If you've got any other little questions or having a look at the stuff, thank you for coming. And the fair should still be open. So you can,
Thank you very much, Andrew. I mean, what you've given us is such a personal picture. I mean, we all have bits and pieces of information that other people have left before, but what your grandfather left was a really clear story of how the different parts fitted together. And I do know from other sources that when Shan's moved in with Axminster Carpets into their factory originally, Harry Duckfield, you know, never forgot how much he had learned from Shan's in terms of engineering, which stood him in very good stead after the war. And whilst Shan's were making important pieces for aircraft and tanks and other war materiel, Axminster Carpets on their side of the building were turning out very large numbers of stirrup pumps, which is sort of the other end of the tech scale. But nevertheless, it's sort of illustrative that all factories which were able to produce things for the war were left doing that. And what you've given us is a really good insight into what Shan's did. So I'm very grateful to you, and thank you for everyone who's come. And if you have any other questions, I'm sure Andrew will be happy to speak at the back. And as he says, there's a number of artifacts and images there. Just to remind you as well, our next talk, which is in roughly a month's time, is on a completely different theme, though there is a slight war link to it, going back to the Battle of Trafalgar, and it's about the Trafalgar Way, and it'll be given by a member of the Trafalgar Way Society, explaining how the route was put together, what happened, and give us the story of that, which, as I say, comes from an earlier era. So we look forward to seeing a number of you there, and tell your friends. And thank you, as I say, thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much.